name is Sharmila Beesmohan, and along with Sarah Sanders and Nick Chapman, I run Speaking Volumes live literature productions. This year we're celebrating our 10th anniversary with the landmark publication of Not Quite Right for Us, an anthology featuring 40 authors who've written poetry, fiction and non-fiction. It's our first time working with Lighthouse Books and the Radical Book Fair up in Scotland, but in many ways it was a partnership that was destined to happen. I'm a trustee of the George Padmore Institute, which holds the archives of the international book fairs of radical Black and Third World books, which happened between 1982 and 1995. The book fairs started in London, but later book fairs also had satellite events in Bradford, Leeds, Manchester and also Glasgow, and there were many prominent Scottish authors who participated in the book fairs too, including James Kelman. In fact, James Kelman became a good friend of John La Rose and Sarah White, who were the co-organisers of the Radical Book Fairs in London, and even celebrated his Booker Prize win with them. I attended the last book fair in 1995 and I was really happy to meet James, and he welcomed me into the book fair and told me all about its history. Now, the Radical Book Fair that we're appearing at today comes out of that tradition, as the book fair moved from Glasgow to Edinburgh and Word Power Books and has now been revamped by Lighthouse Books. So in some ways, it's absolutely fitting that we should be showing you, for the first time, our chapter on Friends. We hope you enjoy it. Thank you so much.
So in terms of my own journey, I mean, I was raised in a pretty hyper masculine environment where from a young age people said stuff about my surname and that made me not fit in with some other people. So from school, 1988, when I first went to school, it was like, where are you from? Where's that surname from? And these are young kids saying this stuff, so it obviously must have come down from their parents to have these assumptions of people. And so I spent most of my younger years, right up until my early 20s, if I'm being honest, fighting a lot. I would use my fists instead of using my head. The only time I'd be using my head was to headbutt somebody, probably. And I don't mean any of this in like I was a bully. I was always looking for trouble. Trouble would always find me. And I was outspoken and I'd always stick up for myself. I wasn't the type of guy that would just let people bully me. So despite all that, I always had a creative side to me. I used to try and sing and shout in punk bands. I used to try and spit and MC with my mates who did hip hop. All to pretty bad it was really, but that's just how it is, isn't it? It's part of your development. And it wasn't until my early 20s when I got myself in a lot of trouble, I decided to go to uni as a mature student, that I sort of realised I wanted more from life than the narrative I was perhaps weaving for myself. I gained a bit more confidence. I realised that, I'm not that dumb. I don't just have to be aggressive. I've got stories to tell. I've got a perspective. And I was lucky enough to be mentored and tutored by people who brought that out in me. And I suppose it gave me a new confidence that I had a right to be a writer, a right to be a storyteller. But even if I look back through those more hyper masculine years and the younger years, I always had the ability to hold a room and to, I suppose, fascinate people with stories. People would be engaged with my stories. I could do that at school. I was very quick-witted in terms of if people were throwing cusses at me, I'd fire them straight back down. I always had that sort of, I suppose, the abilities of maybe a comedian or something like a stand-up comedian, where you can just react very quickly to what's going on around you. And so I suppose I utilised that in terms of my stage stuff with the poetry. And ultimately, I see myself as a storyteller. And obviously, working class experiences are a massively important thing to me, as is the idea of just being a little bit different, being an outsider. I've always found it a strange concept because obviously, look at me, you know, I'm just like a white lad. But I've got the surname Frasivulu, and you carry that around with you, and people do say to you all the time, oh, where's that from? Well, it's like, well, my granddad came to Derby, and so the surname's from Derby, but it's from Cyprus originally. And it's kind of like, you know, I've kind of wonder why we're still having those conversations, but we are still having those conversations, and I can never think of a time that I've told someone my surname and they don't ask where that's from. Whether that's out of intrigue or whether it's like a bit confrontational, that still happens. So, yeah, so all these kind of things come out in my writing anyway.
And watch them load their memories of this promised land into the back of a transit van. It was too much, so escape reality through backstreet boozer saloon door. Entered the promised land in nanoseconds. Arrived and present. Liverpool thrashing City on the telly. Jed, the true Brit, is hosting an angry post-work barstool summit. Judgment slammed down. Carling glass clang on wood. Got some cheat them lot. Something not quite right about that. Could be carrying bodies or drugs or out. Look at the state of them. Not quite right. The glare from a headlight skims the Romanian number plate. And watched through the window. Watched the family load Nat to write home about into a self-addressed envelope. And now there's a few of Jed's cronies at it. Dishing out the banter. Serving it up with all the sauce and trimmings. And then there's a goal. And the summit loses momentum. The convo turns to Derby-born men arguing over falsified allegiances. There's not a Manc or Scarcer in the building, so pipe it down, you pair. Jed's not losing this one. Oh no, he's not losing this one. Eyes bulge towards the window once more. Just who do they think they are? Just who do they think they are? It's really not right. And watched Jed's blood boil to a chemical crescendo, mouth frothed, teeth chopping like a guillotine. And off to the bogs for a leveller. Reappears with a ring of confidence. Next that Carling gas. And he's outside. Jed is outside the building for a fag. And the streetlights pan to a young Romanian lad, asking Jed for a lighter. Light please, sir. Light please, sir. Jed obliges, sure he does, lands him a good un, ha ha ha, and watches gob flobbed right across the youth's brow. And then Jed is down. Jed is down and out of the building and waking up with a crowd around him. And there is more laughter than tears. And I'm just watching. I'm just watching him come round whilst passing the young Romanian lad a lighter and telling him he can keep it.
Hello, beautiful people. My name is Ashleigh Nugent. You can call me Ash. I am a writer, I'm a performer, and I am a director of a company called Rise Up CIC. It's not Rise Up twice, it's just one Rise Up. But I like doing that. Rise Up. Okay, in talking about my writing, the first thing I should say is that writing, I could say, saved my life, indeed changed my life massively. When I was 21 years old, I had loved writing, poetry mainly, my whole life, as far back as I could write. But I'd never admitted to anybody that I wrote. I didn't have friends who were into writing. I indeed didn't even read books. I considered myself to be one of the non-intelligent, the non-academic types, because school made me feel like I was thick. For a number of reasons, I would say the ADHD didn't really help. Sit still and listen to what we've got to tell you till your bum bones hurt from sitting on a rock hard chair all day didn't really suit my style. I had too much energy, too much creativity. Hey, I'm sorry. Sauce. But I couldn't do the school thing. I'd say also the colonised curriculum where nobody that did anything of any worth in the whole of world history, according to schools, looked like me. Now that I'm older, I would say that probably put me off a little bit as well. But I left school thinking that I was unintelligent with no qualifications. I did 1 C grade GCSE 1 in PE. It doesn't count. Anyway, PE. Anyway, so the police then made me feel like I had been born to be a criminal. I had been arrested 3 times by the time I was 16. Locked up, taken to the cells, handcuffed, laces taken off me, belt taken off me, taken to court, all the stuff. And all 3 times, no crime had been committed, at least not by me. This was simple racial profiling. Where I lived, nobody else looked like me and my family. And I would say that, you know, the way society was, it made us act in a kind of barbaric way. In the 80s and 90s, our male role models, the hegemonic male ideal, was some American maniac running around shooting people in a movie, or shooting Native Americans, as I mentioned in the poem, or whatever, or, you know, colonialists in our history books, or maniac psychopaths like Julius Caesar. You know, so, and then as soon as we act in a kind of aggressive way as young men, we are deemed to be criminals, and we are punished and patronised and blamed. So you understand how society makes us think, feel and act in certain ways. Now obviously I know nowadays that nobody can make me think, feel or do anything, because I have control of what I think, feel and do, but that's taken a lot of time, and that's what we teach at Rise Up in prisons mainly, also schools and whatnot, but mainly in prisons. That's how we help people to rise up, by understanding how to control their own thoughts, feelings and actions. Now, when I was 17, well, for my 17th birthday indeed, I went to Jamaica, because there wasn't any other black and mixed race people where I grew up. So I went to Jamaica thinking I'd find a place where I fit in and understand this black identity that had been foisted upon me my whole life. I was naive. As it turns out, I didn't fit in Jamaica. Indeed, within 3 days of being in Jamaica, I'd been mugged and then stabbed, then arrested and banged up. I was locked up in underground dungeons for a short while. There's no running water, no flushing toilets. I eventually had to escape the country illegally. I watched 2 friends, die while I was banged up in Jamaica. And very interestingly, what I learned in Jamaica was that I was no longer the black lad in Jamaican detention centre. I was the white boy. I learnt this while being savagely beaten unconscious over the head with a big stick while people chanted. I won't swear, but let's just say they were saying beat up the white man. So this is the topic of my book, my debut novel. It's called Locks. It's doing very well, it's getting very good reviews, and this has been a massive challenge. This happened 28 years ago. And from the point of writing, it's taken me 8 years to write this book. So over the years, I have also, when I was 21, I started getting honest about writing. That got me into rap. I became a performer. And then I got into working as a community artist. I worked with the Royal Liverpool Philharmonic Orchestra in schools and mental health units. And as I say, now I work in prisons. And I've won awards, and I do this kind of beautiful work. So indeed, writing changed, if not saved, my life. I understand that you won't understand, because you could never live as me. But I know what you think, because I am you. You aspire to be John Wayne or Winston Churchill or the Queen, to win a crown or win the war or slaughter folks at Wounded Knee. And when we grew and learned, our heroes saw my family as the enemy. Well, you could just ignore such facts, 'cause you could never live as me. We had the biggest empire, you're white, they're red and blue. We are the cleverest, the bravest and most worthy, point is proved. But when it dawned on us, the blood we drink is how the empire grew. It was easier to ignore the guilt, I know, 'cause I am you. When they say muddy-coloured people are polluting our white country and there's something in their blood that makes them indolent and ugly, you don't have to sift the ashes of your old identity to understand how you agreed with them, 'cause you could never live as me. Obama changed the narrative, so now what we accrue is all attributive to what the individual may choose. Institutions trumping history, they're easy to refuse. You want to think that we're all colourblind, I know, cause I am you. You will never feel that everything you say and do and be is being observed and compared and judged uncompromisingly and deemed innate to all who shared your shade throughout all human history. This burden's never crossed your mind, cause you could never live as me, and logic seems to state that if we gain, you surely lose, even if that gain was only some brief mention in the news, or a few flimsy attempts to be more honest in their schools. But if I truly gain, it's your gain too, I know, cause I am me and you. So stop and think, get real, this thing is nowhere near through. Never doubt you have my love though, you should know, cause I am you. And I will stop and feel and understand that blame won't help us breathe. And I will speak, but will you listen? Because you could never live as me.
I was born and educated in Gaya, an ancient but a small town of Bihar. Very similar to the town Pasa that appears in my short story and that always appears in all of my fiction. I wrote a couple of articles that made some local fundamentalists very upset at me, and I had to leave my hometown for a short while. I could go back afterwards, things were forgotten. But for a few months I had to leave my hometown. I ended up in Delhi, where I was lucky to be hired by the Times of India as a staff reporter. I worked there for 4 or 5 years. But even before I'd moved to Delhi, actually, I'd been lucky enough to win a national poetry competition. And I had my first collection of poems published. So all of this combined to send me out in the world, something I didn't really know how I would achieve when I was growing up in that small town. My family, despite having professional education, was not the kind of family that had been traveling. No one from my immediate family had ever been to the West. In due course, I realized that I couldn't really be a writer and be a journalist at the same time. Journalism was a time-consuming profession, and I needed more time to read and write. And around that time, I'd also met a woman I was very much in love with while traveling in Europe. And I decided to apply for a PhD in Copenhagen University. I was admitted, and I moved to Copenhagen, where I did my PhD. And where I wrote the first novel, which was published internationally, The Bus Has Stopped by Picketer, which is set very much in the kind of town I grew up in, which I call Pasa. After that, I followed it up with another novel, also published by Picketer, called Filming, which is set in the 1930s, 40s, though narrated from the vantage point of a decade further on. And this is set largely in the Indian film industry, the early days of the Indian film industry. After that, I continued writing, less and less poetry, because I was an academic. And academia, again, while it gave me time to read, and sometimes time to write, it also imposed certain demands on my language, which I found difficult to combine with poetry. I do think that the most concentrated a genre, the more space and time it requires. Poems and shorter stories for me require more time, actually, and more space than novels do. So I have written more novels, and in recent years, I have published novels like How to Fight Islamist Terror from the Missionary Position, set largely in Denmark. Just Another Jihadi Jain, set partly in England. It's the story of two lower middle class immigrant girls who have grown up in England, running off to join the so-called jihad in Syria, in Iraq, and what happens to them. And my last book, which was never published in England or in America, a novella called Night of Happiness, which is set in India again. Gridher sat in a wicker chair on the balcony of his palatial new house in a suburb of Bhopal and browsed through the 7 daily newspapers, 3 in Hindi, to which he subscribed. It was 7:30 in the morning. He had been up from 5:30, as was his routine. First his puja, then yoga and a stint on his exercise bike, before taking a shower in cold water, for that was good for his circulation. Now he had exactly half an hour on his own before the business of the day began, seeing people. Gridher was a municipal councillor, hoping to get a ticket from the Congress party to become a member of the Legislative Assembly. He had retired early as a police officer to enter this field. His wife walked in with a tray. On it were a cup of tea and a plate with 2 biscuits. She put it on the wicker table and went back into the house to instruct the cook. Breakfast had to be served exactly at 8. One of the 3 smartphones on the table buzzed. Gridher looked at it with annoyance. This was his private moment. Then he saw it was a message from the WhatsApp group he shared with his old school friend from Pasa, a small town in another state. He picked up the phone. Lakshmi had finished supervising her husband's office-going rituals. His office was in another part of the house. What he did there was partly a mystery to Lakshmi. One part of it, the part that had to do with making money. The money that had enabled them to move out of Pasa and buy this sprawling farmhouse outside Lucknow. The other part she knew and understood. Her husband wrote historical novels. He published them under his own imprint because established publishers were so biased. But since 2014, her husband had started receiving prizes and attention. The prizes were by organizations with names like the Hindu Renewal League or Sanatan Dharma Sahitya or the Yogi Trading Association, not the Booker Committee or even the Sahitya Academy, but Lakshmi was not familiar with the distinction between such organizations. The prizes showered on her husband seemed impressive to her, and the functions involved ministers, dozens of impassive-looking people, sometimes even TV and film stars. Just last year, when they had finally visited USA, her husband had been honored as a best-selling author at a literary event organized by the Indian High Commission. Lakshmi was happy with her life. She designed dresses in her spare time and proud of her husband. She devoted full attention to him when he was around. But the moment he left, a pile of books carried behind him by a servant, she picked up her iPhone. That is when she saw the WhatsApp message. Santosh saw the message at 8 in the company bus that he took to work. Even though he had a car, this was Delhi. He did not want to drive needlessly and could not afford a driver. Oh, actually, he could afford a driver, if only drivers were not such cheats, because the last one had not only asked him for repeated rises, but had also siphoned off and sold petrol from the tanks of his Hyundai i20. There was no point. The corporation he worked for ran company buses, and it took just 30 to 40 minutes, an hour if the traffic was bad, so Santosh mostly left his car behind. It also enabled him to catch up on office gossip in the air-conditioned bus and check his iPhone, for unlike the other men he knew, Santosh was a progressive person and actually helped prepare breakfast and his 3 children for school, after which both he and his wife left for work. His wife taught in a kindergarten in the neighborhood. Manish had a flight to Kolkata. He was at Patna airport, which was far too small for the city. To think that when he was growing up in nearby Patha, he had considered this a metropolis. Years of innocence. The Air India flight was 45 minutes late, but now it had been announced and they were being called to board. He was not worried about being late. Manish was high enough in the multi-layered life insurance corporation for people to wait for his arrival. As he walked to the gate, he felt his iPhone buzzing in his jacket pocket. He had it on silent mode. Manish took it out and switched it off without looking at the messages. It was his policy never to check anything on his mobile phone while boarding a plane. The last time he had done so, about a decade ago in 2008, there had been news of a share market collapse that had cost him more than 4 lakhs before his plane had finally landed and he could sell off his shares. It had been the worst flight of his life. He would switch on his iPhone only when he landed. What happens? Happens. Sunita almost missed the message. She had left in a rush for her work at a private Bangalore college, having finally managed to get tenure at the age of 49, just 6 years ago. And by the time she took her lunch break in the college cafeteria, so many messages had piled up that she could not even look at all of them. But then a colleague in the cafeteria remarked, "Olden friends are golden." It reminded her that she had not checked her old school WhatsApp group for a day or two now. She could see 21 unread messages highlighted there. The number jumped out at her. Some were from yesterday, but most were from the morning. They were all in response to a message by Arjun that had been posted early in the morning at 7:32 exactly. Arjun was the only person from the group who was still in Pasa, the town where they had all grown up and whose best English medium school they had attended. 6 boys and girls out of a graduation batch of 23 had stayed on in town. They did not connect to the WhatsApp group. One boy had died of alcoholism, though no one talked about it, and 2 were struggling financially. Another boy, always a loner, was said to be depressed. And the 2 girls who had married early into families in the town claimed they were not on WhatsApp. Arjun ran a successful clothes retailing business in Pasa and was the only one in the WhatsApp group. He was their source of news from their old hometown. Akbar had 2 iPhones, one for work family and one for fun. He never looked at the latter until his lunch break well after 2, depending on when he had finished examining all the files and orders piled up on his desk, as well as the previous day's productivity charts for the 11 employees in his export-import business in Ahmedabad. The old school WhatsApp group was obviously on his fun iPhone, and he saw the message only when he switched it on at 3:07 in the afternoon. It had been a busy day. The last message was from Adarsh. This was rare. Adarsh was the only one from the batch to become a doctor. He had moved to the US and seldom participated in the group chats that erupted abruptly every few days. Akbar read the conversation carefully. He frowned. He read it again. He wondered if he should reply. It was a difficult choice. He felt he should say something, but he hesitated. Arjun, I thought I should inform you that Aurangzeb's brother has left for Pakistan. Local police investigating his family here. National security issue. His parents interrogated, I was told this morning. It all took place last night. You know, Aurangzeb had been arrested before he left for London 10 years ago. Very worrying developments for all of us. Gridha, calm down those. I have been in the police. Aurangzeb was arrested for some street protest, nothing devastating. People living for Pakistan is not a national security issue. No one's parents interrogated for that, let me assure you. Been there, done that. Arjun, Gridhar Babu, you might know, but I do not know anyone who has left for Pakistan. I am quoting reliable sources, believe not believe. Gridhar, what? Those Naraha? Of course I believe you, Guru. But sources, please. Arjun, reliable. Cannot reveal name for obvious reason. Lakshmi, oh God, we do not need this. I did not even know Aurangzeb was in this group. He was trouble even in his school. It was lucky he was not rusticated. Who put him on? Who else has been sneaked into this group? This is beyond belief. This is a private group. Gridhar, Guru Arjun, do not give me all that classified stuff. I have been an officer. Arjun, Gridhar Babu, not everyone flies as high as you or your precious Lieutenant Congress does. I have been told by sources that anyone corresponding with Aurangzeb or his family will be under surveillance. Lakshmi ji, I think Sudeep put Aurangzeb on. Lakshmi, Sudeep? He left us in class 7. Why is he in the group? I have seen no posting from him or Aurangzeb anyway. Why are they here if they do not post? What is the point? Why are there so many people here who do not post? Manish, did you make Sudeep the coordinator? I thought you were the coordinator. Who did this? Oh my God, my husband will be so upset. He knows all these government high-ups. We had dinner with the state minister just last Saturday. Arjun, I agree this is looking bad, friends. Sudeep, Lakshmi ji, your husband was in touch with Aurangzeb just a year ago when he wanted some books to be shipped over from London. I know. Aurangzeb told me he went to a library for the first time since college to order photocopies of the 3 books. So, if you excuse my Sanskrit, what the fuck? Lakshmi, I'm not talking to you, Sudeep ji. I hardly remember you from school. You left for another school when in class 7? This is a group of people who graduated together, as far as I am concerned. I am asking Manish. Manish, where are you? I'm going to call you on the phone now. This needs to be sorted out. You stay out of this, Sudeep ji. Arjun, Sudeep Bapu, this is serious. I will be leaving the group if Aurangzeb continues to be part of it. I have no desire to associate with people being investigated by the authorities. His brother was interviewed by security at the airport. I have it from reliable sources. I think some of us will have to leave, as we do not live in liberal metropolitan circles, you know. Gridhar, take it easy, Guru. It means nothing. Who are your sources? Sunita, oh no, I just saw this. I'm shocked. Aurangzeb has been in London for years. Didn't he graduate from Aligarh Muslim University? Arjun, yes, his brother was a student leader there too. Lakshmi, I finally got in touch with Manish. He was on a flight. He's going to delete Aurangzeb as soon as he gets home. We cannot have the police looking into our group. Not that we have anything to hide, but we want to be free to talk about our lives and common experiences. We do not want to be watched. You should not have connected him, Sudeep ji. It was very immature of you. You knew his background. It is not as if he is like Akbar. He was always a troublemaker. Sudeep left. Sunita, I do not understand what is up. Why did Sudeep leave? Santosh, just saw this. Are we sure about all this? I mean, Aurangzeb was a bit wild, and so was his brother, I guess. But I recall him drinking beer with us. Not really the Pakistani type, if you ask me. Gridhar, Guru Santosh, who can doubt Arjun Guru's sources? Arjun, Thank you, Gridhar boss. That is good coming from you and your party. Manish, doing it in 5 minutes if no objections. Sorry for the hassle, friends. Let's all just stay calm, okay? Aurangzeb removed. Santosh, I still think we should have given Aurangzeb time to respond. Maybe he would have clarified. Just saying. Sunita, well, he did get time from 7:30 this morning. I do not like this, but why didn't he clarify? It is unfair to do this to your school friends. We all have our own lives, our own troubles. I know my college board. They do not want people with controversies teaching in college. Jobs do not sit on branches for some of us. Gridhar, perhaps because England is 4 or 5 hours behind us, Sunita ji? Not that I've been there. Lakshmi, we have to be careful who we allow into this group. It has to be close friends, people we know, people we can trust. These are dangerous times. Did you read about the ISI agents arrested just 2 weeks ago? Santosh, oh well, what is done is done. Arjun, now don't you leave too. Adarsh, what's up? Where is Arjun going? Manish, yes Arjun, stay on yaar. Let's not break old ties. Adarsh, sorry friends, just got up. Have read it now. Sad, sad. Never thought. But Arjun, don't leave. Arjun, no reason for anyone to leave now. Yes, Adarsh boss, very sad. Gridhar, atta boy, ye yari hum nahi todenge. Lakshmi, Sudeep should have thought about this. Just put us in a spot without thinking. Selfish of him. So relieved things are getting back to normal. Sunita, great you are staying, Arjun. You are our man in Pasa, and olden friends are golden. Lakshmi, I just had this idea, friends. Why don't we make a shared online album of photos from our high school years? I have quite a few. Should I do it? And then give access to you all to post photos? Nothing like school days. Gridhar, good idea, Lakshmiji. Sunita, why didn't we think of this earlier? Great idea. Wow, Lakshmi, you are the creative one here. New shared album created. Akbar sits down to dinner with his 2 children. His wife is still in the kitchen making rotis. He has been thinking about this all day, ever since he first read the messages during his late lunch break. He has seen it unfold on WhatsApp. He has hesitated half a day. But looking at his children, he feels he has to respond. Not to write seems worse than writing something. He takes out his fun phone and keys in his message quickly before his wife comes out with the food and tells him not to work, at least not at dinner time. Akbar, hey friends, what's up? Having dinner here. It has been a busy day at work. That GST bureaucratic shit means even more work for us businessmen. I have not been able to follow anything online for days. Gridhar bhai, you want to change professions? I'm told you only sit in your office for 3 hours every morning. Gotta run now, guys. Steaming roti on the way.
My name's Helen Mort. I live in Sheffield and I was born in Chesterfield, so sort of the Midlands, north of England. And I've always kind of stayed in this area because it's the place that I like to write about the most. I started writing poetry when I was at school, probably when I was sort of 10 or 11, and I always used to hide my poems away in drawers because I didn't think that anyone would want to read them. But as a teenager, I was lucky enough to, I think my uncle encouraged me to enter a poetry competition called the Phill Young Poets of the Year Award. And so I did, and I was massively fortunate. I was one of the winners of that competition. And the prize was to go on a week's residential Arvon course with other young writers. And I guess it was just the first time that I felt that somebody else might be interested in reading my work, and that I was surrounded by like-minded people, because nobody that I knew at home was interested in poetry at all, really. So it was that sense of community that was established, I suppose, that really got me writing and thinking more seriously about publishing my poems when I was older. So I've kind of never stopped. I published my first pamphlet when I was at uni. I was in my early 20s, I think, and I published that with a brilliant independent press in London called Tall Lighthouse. And I'm always so grateful to Tall Lighthouse for the kind of the risk that they took in publishing someone new, and all the brilliant voices that they've supported over the years. Moving on from that, I carried on sending out my work to magazines and trying to read at open mics. I remember that I had a day job in an office. It was not that far from London, so I used to think about poems when I was making the tea and doing filing and stuff like that, and then I'd race after work to get on a train so that I could go to London to go to a spoken word night or an open mic night or something like that. So poetry has always been in my life, even before I was really publishing that much. I was lucky enough to have my first collection picked up by Chatto and Windus, and the book was called Division Street, which is a road that runs through the centre of Sheffield, which is where I now live. And as I said, I've always been quite preoccupied with writing about places and the importance that places have emotionally for us, for the people who live in them. And Division Street for me was not just a street, it was a metaphor for some of the things that I wanted to chart in that book, including the miners' strike and the Battle of Orgreave in the 1980s, which was obviously a really iconic and tragic moment in the clash between miners and police. I suppose a lot of the pieces in that book draw on my childhood, which was in a very kind of not quite rural, not quite urban, post-industrial former mining district in northeast Derbyshire, which until recently was Dennis Skinner's constituency. So a lot of the themes I was exploring were to do with place. I then published a second collection in 2015, I think it must have been, or maybe 16, which looked at the history of women's mountaineering and pioneering overlooked women at different points in history, which is another big interest of mine. When I'm not writing, I'm out climbing and running in Derbyshire, well, when I can. And so it was kind of bringing my passion for the outdoors into my writing as well. I've since gone on to write a novel, again, which was set in Sheffield, surprise, surprise, and some non-fiction and some short stories. And I've just finished a book which is about women, mothers particularly, and mountaineering, and mothers and sons. And it's sort of about my own experiences of trying to go back to climbing a bit in the time since my son was born a few years ago. So I write a bit of everything. I love experimenting with new genres and trying new possibilities. There's nothing that I won't try to write, and I'm a voracious reader, and I've always got a novel on the go. The piece that I wrote for Speaking Volumes, Airhead, was prompted by, I guess, years of being annoyed by stuff like blonde jokes, which is something I've written about before, and even this phrase airhead, which really winds me up. And I decided to take that a bit literally and draw on some images and metaphors from the air and from those kinds of planetary metaphors, I guess. But I guess it's meant to be a critique of judging people on first sight in any kind of way. When Libra gets to the cocktail party, she digs into her pleather handbag for her gift and finds she's only brought the stars, crumbled blue cheese, ash stink of them. She excuses herself, floats to the bathroom, locks the door, but the window's open and her mother, the sky, slips in to spy on her, criticise her sun-coloured blouse, loud blonde hair. Libra always has clean socks, irons her underwear, but no one cares. She haunts the edges of the room, troubled by her moony face in the flicker of a lifted wine glass or held in the lens of someone else's eyes. She cannot leave a conversation, so she talks until tight smiles become excuses, gazes drift over her shoulder. Would you dance with her? In your arms, she'd cleave to your shape, merge with your shadow. She's so polite, but she weighs herself down with empty bottles, gold fizzing liquid, hoping to anchor the kite of her heart. So eager. It's not her fault she smells of old clouds and aeroplane trails. Would you hold her hand? Would you take her home if you thought she wrote this?
Hello, my name's Tim Wells. I started out as a ranting poet in the early 80s, gigged a lot of punk bands, reggae dances, that kind of thing. I stuck with poetry even when my girlfriend left me because of how I used punctuation. She said I was too possessive. These days I don't just write poetry, but I still do. But I also write pulp horror novels. It's what the kids want. Why the Barmaid is in therapy. It's the mid-afternoons that drag. The early promise of the day is wasted and it's the same old ruddy faces. It's not even that they're bad people, it's just that blokes like me, we don't do therapy. She's heard it all. The job, wife, kids, team. Her keeping that grin takes more than the odd gin. Cleaning the glasses and bottling never stops, but at least there's a sparkle to a glass. What's in the bottle might be a good time. But this ain't the young crowd of an evening. This is the relentless tick of the clock, rattle of prescription medication, self-reflection in the mirror where you know not to catch anyone's eye. It's the optimism that's the worst. It always starts so well. Cheers, a bit of a joke. From there on, the glass is half empty. What life serves. It's cold out and warm in. The cafe windows are steamed up. This claustrophobia pulls close. Opposite, Amar has seen off for full English. No bacon, extra sausage. There are lines we cross, but only so far. He takes out his phone and photos his empty plate, still swilled with sauce. I look on, puzzled. Amar looks up and smiles. It's just not right to send a picture of a full plate of food to me mum. She's still a refugee, but an empty one. Well, she knows I'm okay.